The mist still clung to the ancient redwoods at US 745, a spectral shroud that muffled the world, making every snap of a twig beneath Elias Thorne's worn boots sound unnervingly loud. A veteran ranger, Elias had walked these trails for 20 years, his stride as familiar with the forest floor as a heartbeat. Mornings like this, cool and quiet, were his sanctuary. His duty was to observe, to protect, to understand the delicate balance of this sprawling wilderness. But today, the silence felt less like peace and more like a held breath. He'd been tracking an anomaly on his perimeter sensors, a subtle energy fluctuation, easily dismissed as a glitch or stray wildlife. Yet his gut, honed by decades of instinct, nagged at him. He moved deeper off the marked path, his gaze sweeping the undergrowth, a familiar weight of his sidearm at his hip, a precaution usually reserved for bear encounters, not phantom readings. Then he saw it. A young buck, its coat a rich, vibrant brown, lay partially obscured by a fallen redwood. At first glance, Elias assumed a coyote kill, maybe even a lone wolf, though wolves were rare this far south. But as he drew closer, a cold dread began to seep into his bones, chilling him more effectively than the morning air. The buck wasn't merely dead, it was dissected, not torn apart by the frenzied hunger of a predator, but precisely, surgically opened. A clean incision, almost impossibly smooth, ran down its flank, exposing muscle and bone without a single shred of ragged flesh or gnawed tissue. There was no blood pooling on the forest floor, only a dark, congealed stain where the life had left its body. The sheer unnatural precision of the cut defied any explanation Elias could conjure. No animal, no matter how skilled a hunter, could produce such a wound. He knelt, his gloved fingers tracing the edge of the ghastly incision. The edges were seared, as if subjected to intense heat, yet the surrounding fur was untouched. A faint, almost imperceptible metallic tang hung in the air, foreign to the earthy scent of pine and damp soil. His mind, trained in wildlife pathology and forensic analysis, cycled through possibilities. Poachers with specialized tools, a deranged hunter. But the sheer scale of the operation, the lack of struggle, the absence of any other tracks besides the deer's own approach, baffled him. The animal had simply lain down and been opened. His flashlight beam cut through the remaining mist, revealing another detail, more unsettling than the last. Embedded deep within the exposed muscle tissue, almost invisible to the naked eye, was a tiny glinting shard. It wasn't bone nor metal he recognized. It was dark, almost obsidian, with a strange, unnatural sheen. He carefully, gingerly picked it out with his forceps, dropping it into a sterile sample bag he always carried. It felt impossibly light, yet solid, its edges too perfect, too symmetrical to be a natural fragment. Elias stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the dense canopy, then the forest floor. A profound sense of unease settled over him, replacing his initial scientific curiosity with a primal fear. This wasn't an animal mystery. This was an impossible encounter. This wasn't natural. And if it wasn't natural, what was it? Who was responsible? The forest, usually his comfort, now felt like a vast, watchful entity, its silence no longer peaceful but ominous, pregnant with an unseen presence. He felt a sudden, intense urge to look over his shoulder, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his first days as a greenhorn ranger, navigating the wilderness alone. His heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the core that his routine patrol had just veered into something far more dangerous, far more sinister than any wildlife incident he'd ever encountered. This was a secret lurking in the mist, and he had just stumbled directly into its path. The implications of what he was witnessing, what he held in his hand, began to coalesce into a terrifying, unspeakable truth. He had to report this, but to whom? And what would they do when he told them that a deer had been opened with the precision of a surgeon by something that left no trace? The walk back to his patrol vehicle felt different. Every rustle of leaves, every distant bird call, now carried an edge of menace. Elias clutched the sample bag containing the obsidian shard, his knuckles white. His mind raced, cycling through every protocol, every emergency contact. This wasn't a job for local law enforcement or even his usual superiors. This was something else entirely. He reached for his satellite phone, the heavy device feeling cold in his shaking hand, and dialed Chief Ranger Davies. "Elias, what's up? You sound rattled." Davies's voice, usually gruff but reassuring, crackled through the line. Elias recounted his discovery, his voice tight, trying to maintain his professional composure even as his fear threatened to overwhelm him. He described the buck, the impossibly precise incision, the seared edges, and the unsettling lack of blood. "Chief, it wasn't a predator. It wasn't poachers. It was surgical. And I found this." He briefly described the dark shard, omitting the more fantastic details of its feel and unnatural sheen, trying to stick to objective facts. A beat of silence followed, longer than Elias expected. "Surgical, you say? That's highly unusual, Thorne. Are you certain you're not misinterpreting a unique predation pattern?" Davies's tone was skeptical, practical, grounded. "I've been tracking animals in these woods for 20 years, Chief. I've seen everything from bear attacks to cougar kills. This was nothing like that. This was calculated." "All right," Davies conceded, a hint of concern now in his voice. "Stay put. Don't touch anything else. I'll send a team out. Might be a new sick breed of trophy hunter. Keep an eye on the perimeter." Elias stayed. He secured the area with flimsy yellow tape, a futile gesture he knew against whatever had done this. The metallic tang still lingered in the air, a phantom scent clinging to the ancient trees. He checked his watch. 15:10. Less than an hour later, it wasn't Chief Davies or his familiar colleagues who arrived. The sound reached him first, a low, distant hum, growing steadily. Then, through the thinning mist, he saw them. Not the dusty, green and white Park Service vehicles he expected, but two sleek, dark SUVs, unmarked, their engines purring almost silently. They pulled up to his patrol car, and a team of individuals emerged. They wore no park ranger uniforms, no local sheriff insignias. Their attire was a generic dark gray, military-grade tactical gear, devoid of any identifying marks. Their movements were precise, efficient, their face grim, focused, and utterly devoid of warmth. They were a stark contrast to the natural wildness of the forest, an intrusion of cold, clinical order. The leader, a woman with sharp, unreadable eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun, approached Elias without a word. She didn't introduce herself. Her gaze swept over him, taking in his uniform, his weary expression, and the sample bag he still held. "Ranger Thorne," she stated, her voice flat, devoid of inflection. "We're taking over. This area is now classified." Elias felt a chill colder than the morning air. "Classified? What are you talking about? I reported an animal mutilation to Chief Davies." "Chief Davies has been informed." She cut him off, her eyes never leaving his. "This is a level 4 incident. You are to return to your station. Your report has been noted. You will refrain from discussing this incident with anyone, under any circumstances. Failure to comply will result in severe repercussions." Her words were a soft, silk-gloved threat. Before he could react, the rest of her team was already in motion. They moved with chilling efficiency, their equipment far more advanced than anything Elias had ever seen. Drones hummed silently overhead, scanning the tree line. Men in hazmat suits, looking like ghosts in the dappled sunlight, descended on the buck's carcass, meticulously collecting samples, spraying the ground with an unknown solution, and then, with disturbing speed, lifting the entire remains onto a specialized stretcher. They worked in absolute silence, communicating only through hand signals. Elias watched, helpless, as they systematically erased every trace of his impossible discovery. They weren't investigating, they were sanitizing. They weren't curious, they were executing a predefined protocol. His gut screamed at him. This wasn't about a diseased animal or a rogue hunter. This was a cover-up, a clandestine operation moving with the weight of unseen power. He gripped the sample bag in his pocket, the tiny dark shard a burning secret against his thigh. They hadn't seen him collect it. They hadn't asked. His duty was to the truth, to the integrity of this park. But these people, these shadows in tactical gear, represented a different kind of authority, one that didn't care for truth, only for control. He was being sidelined, his 20 years of experience dismissed, his eyewitness account nullified. Fear mixed with a potent, dangerous indignation. He knew with a sinking certainty that he held the only physical evidence of something profound and terrifying, something they desperately wanted to keep hidden. And that made him a liability. The leader turned to him again, her gaze unwavering. Is that understood, Ranger Thorne? He met her eyes, a silent battle of wills playing out. Understood, he said, his voice barely a whisper, but his resolve hardening. He knew he was walking away from his duty, but towards a far greater, more dangerous one. The impossible encounter had just become a classified incident, and Elias Thorne was now an unwilling player in a game he didn't understand, a game with stakes far beyond a dead deer. He needed answers, and he knew he couldn't trust them to provide them. He had to find them himself. The drive back to the ranger station was a blur of trees and asphalt. Elias's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles ached. The silence inside his patrol vehicle was deafening, amplifying the frantic beat of his heart. He tried to rationalize what he'd witnessed, but the cold efficiency of the covert team, their unmarked vehicles, and the chilling threat of the leader's voice defied any logical explanation. This wasn't a standard government response to a strange animal death. This was a deliberate, calculated suppression. Back in his cabin, a small, rustic dwelling nestled on the edge of the park, Elias felt a profound sense of isolation. The familiar scent of pine and old paper, usually comforting, now seemed to mock him, a fragile veneer over something terrifying. He pulled the small sample bag from his pocket, the dark shard within a silent accusation. Under the harsh glare of his desk lamp, it shimmered with an unsettling, almost alien quality. It wasn't obsidian, not really. It absorbed the light, yet somehow reflected it back with an inner luminescence. He placed it carefully on a clean white cloth, then stared at it, his mind reeling. He had been dismissed, warned, threatened. They wanted him to forget. But Elias Thorne wasn't built for forgetting. His 20 years in the park had ingrained in him a deep reverence for truth, for the sanctity of life, even in death. This incident had shattered his reality, and he couldn't simply walk away. Later that evening, after a restless, unsatisfying meal, the solitude of his cabin became suffocating. He paced, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He thought of his life, his simple existence, his dedication to the wilderness. Now, everything felt precarious, tainted. He looked at his watch, 23:05. The late hour offered no comfort, only the deepening shadows outside his window. A sudden faint flicker caught his eye from the edge of his property. It was subtle, barely noticeable, a flash of light reflecting off something metallic, then gone. His ranger instincts, honed by countless nights in the wild, screamed at him. He killed his cabin lights, plunging the room into near darkness, and moved silently to the window. He saw nothing, only the swaying silhouettes of trees against the pale moonlight. His heart pounded. Were they here? Had they been watching him? He snatched his trusty hunting rifle from its rack, its familiar weight a cold comfort in his hands. He moved with a practiced grace, slipping out the back door into the dense undergrowth. The air was heavy, damp, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Every snap of a twig, every rustle, was magnified, a potential threat. He knew these woods like the back of his hand, but tonight they felt alien, hostile. He circled his cabin, rifle raised, his senses on high alert. He saw no figures, no footprints, yet the feeling of being watched was palpable, an invisible pressure on his skin. He realized with a jolt that his initial fear had morphed into something colder, more dangerous, a desperate need for answers, even if it meant risking everything. This wasn't just about a deer anymore. It was about his own survival, and perhaps the survival of a truth far bigger than himself. He stopped abruptly. He hadn't noticed it before. Tucked beneath a loose stone near the foundation of his cabin, almost perfectly camouflaged, was a small rolled-up piece of paper. It hadn't been there earlier, he was sure. Someone had left it for him. His hands trembled slightly as he unrolled the brittle parchment. It was old, yellowed, and the message was handwritten in a shaky, almost desperate script. There was no name, no obvious signature, Only a string of seemingly random numbers and letters interspersed with ancient-looking symbols, some of which vaguely resembled constellations he knew, others entirely alien. It looked like a fragmented code, or perhaps coordinates, but for what? Then, at the bottom, a single stark warning. They are always watching. Trust no one. The blood drained from Elias's face. Someone else knew. Someone else was trying to communicate with him, trying to warn him. But who? And about what? The cryptic message, delivered under the cover of darkness, shattered any remaining illusion of safety. He was caught in something vast and terrifying. He looked around him into the impenetrable darkness of the forest, the shadows suddenly alive with unseen eyes. His own cabin, his sanctuary, felt exposed, vulnerable. He wasn't just investigating a mystery anymore. He was a target. The game had changed, shifting from investigation to a desperate fight for survival, a lonely quest for truth in a world that seemed determined to bury it. The cryptic note was a physical manifestation of the terror that had begun to grip Elias. Its message, "They are always watching. Trust no one," echoed the unsettling command from the woman in gray. Refrain from discussing this incident with anyone. He held the brittle paper in one hand, the sample bag with the dark shard in the other, both feeling impossibly heavy, anchors dragging him into an abyss he never knew existed. His cabin, once a haven, now felt like a cage, its walls too thin to keep out the unseen eyes. Sleep was impossible. The adrenaline still coursed through him, a cold, restless river. He spread the note on his worn wooden table, his flashlight beam illuminating the strange symbols, the jumbled numbers and letters. They looked like a language designed to conceal, not reveal. He knew he was breaking every protocol, defying every order. His duty as a ranger, strictly speaking, was to obey. But the sight of that buck, so clinically butchered, the chilling efficiency of the dark team, and now this desperate warning, had shattered his professional loyalty. His greater duty, he realized, was to the truth, to the sanctity of the wilderness, and to whatever unimaginable entity was being hidden. He began to work, driven by a desperate urgency. He laid out topo maps of the park, old geological surveys, even a book on local indigenous iconography he'd kept. The symbols on the note didn't match any known constellations precisely, but they hinted at a celestial map, perhaps distorted, perhaps a specific alignment. The alphanumeric string was harder, a jumble of what could be coordinates, a frequency, or a code name. His mind replayed every detail of the classified incident. The dark SUVs, the high-tech equipment, the cold, authoritative woman. He remembered a fleeting glimpse of a small, almost invisible insignia on the side of one of their drones as it lifted off, a stylized, three-pronged symbol. He dismissed it as generic military or government at the time, but now it nagged at him. He searched his internal Park Service database, not for any official records, he knew they'd be scrubbed, but for any obscure reports of unusual activity, anything that didn't quite fit the narrative. He also accessed archived public records, things usually overlooked. Old land deeds, corporate acquisitions, mining claims, anything that touched the perimeter of his park. The hours bled into each other. He felt a profound sense of isolation, the weight of the trust no one warning pressing down on him. He couldn't go to Chief Davies now. Davies had been overridden, probably fed a cover story, or worse, coerced into complicity. No, Elias was alone. Then a breakthrough, subtle but chilling. He cross-referenced the unique frequency signature he'd picked up on his sensor during the initial anomaly, a detail he hadn't shared with Davies, deeming it too technical and abstract for a deer mutilation. This frequency, almost imperceptibly, correlated with a patent application he found in an obscure online database, filed years ago under a shell corporation. The patent was for advanced material resonance testing, abstract enough to mean anything, but the energy signature matched. Further digging, fueled by caffeine and sheer will, revealed the Shell Corporation was a subsidiary of a much larger entity, Ethelgard Industries. The name itself felt cold, corporate, devoid of humanity. Ethelgard. He typed it into a private search engine and the results confirmed his growing dread. a global conglomerate, seemingly innocuous, dealing in everything from advanced aerospace materials to deep-sea mining. And their logo, a subtle, almost subliminal design found on some of their less public-facing assets, was a highly stylized three-pronged symbol that unnervingly echoed the drone's insignia and even some of the strange markings on the cryptic note. The alphanumeric string from the note, when run through a decryption algorithm he remembered from an old survivalist forum, started to yield fragmented results. Not coordinates, not a frequency, but what looked like a series of project code names, each linked to Ethelgard Industries' Experimental Research Division. One of these code names, an ominous sequence of letters and numbers, kept reappearing in leaked documents and hushed forum discussions about corporate black sites and unethically conducted scientific endeavors. It pointed to a location deep within the national forest, just beyond Elias's traditional patrol area, but still on park land acquired decades ago under dubious circumstances, now listed as a private research facility. He felt a profound shift in his understanding. This wasn't a random incident, nor a bizarre natural phenomenon. This was a deliberate, highly organized, and deeply funded operation. Ethelgard Industries. The name alone conjured images of shadowy corporate power, cutting-edge technology, and a ruthless disregard for anything that stood in their way. The classified incident wasn't a government cover-up in the traditional sense. It was a corporate one, utilizing specialized assets to protect their illicit activities. The chill he felt was no longer just fear for his life, but a terrifying realization of the sheer scale of the deception. The deer, the dark shard, the cryptic note, they were all pieces of a puzzle revealing a monstrous corporate ambition hidden beneath the ancient canopy of the forest he was sworn to protect. He was no longer just a ranger. He was an unwitting whistleblower, staring down a colossus. And they already knew he was looking. The silence outside his cabin felt heavier now, pregnant with the unspoken threat of an omnipresent corporate eye, watching his every move. All right, listeners, if you thought Elias Thorne's journey was already a descent into madness, you haven't seen anything yet. We're about to plunge into the heart of the conspiracy, where the stakes aren't just about a ranger's career, but about life, truth, and the very fabric of what we understand about our world. This is where the story gets truly terrifying, where every shadow holds a secret and every decision could be his last. If you're gripping your seats, hit that like button, share this with someone who loves a good thriller, and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss how Elias navigates this impossible danger. The dawn broke over the ancient redwoods, but for Elias, it brought no solace. The corporate name, Ethelgard Industries, and the location of their clandestine research facility burned in his mind. The cryptic note, the dark shard, the surgically opened deer, all pointed to this one horrifying nexus. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he couldn't wait, couldn't trust anyone else. His duty, his moral compass, demanded action. He had to go there. He spent the next few hours in a feverish, methodical preparation. His pack was lighter than usual, stripped down to essentials: high-powered binoculars, a topo map marked with the facility's probable location, a sat phone, off in airplane mode, a precaution against tracking, a compact first aid kit, and enough rations for 2 days. His rifle, a scoped bolt-action .308, felt like an extension of himself, a grim necessity. He secured the obsidian shard in a lead-lined container, a desperate attempt to shield himself from any unknown emissions it might possess, tucking the cryptic note safely inside his waterproof jacket. His compass, an old analog model, was his silent, trustworthy guide. At 3940, as the morning mist began to lift, revealing weak shafts of sunlight, Elias slipped out of his cabin. He moved with the quiet grace of a seasoned ranger, leaving no discernible tracks. His senses heightened to every rustle, every distant bird call. He was no longer just a ranger patrolling his territory. He was an intruder, an enemy, venturing into the lair of an unseen, powerful adversary. The air tasted different now, charged with a subtle, metallic tang that was becoming disturbingly familiar. The journey was arduous. The facility, as he suspected, was cleverly hidden, deep within a section of the national forest that had been designated no entry for decades, under the guise of ecological preservation zones. Ethelgard Industries had woven their web of secrecy carefully, using the very wilderness Elias protected as their shield. He bypassed old, dilapidated fences, their danger keep out signs faded, knowing they were merely decoys. He followed the faint, almost invisible tracks of heavy vehicles, carefully hidden beneath layers of deliberately spread foliage. As he drew closer, the telltale signs of a modern, high-security installation began to emerge. Advanced motion sensors, camouflaged amongst the trees, blinked almost imperceptibly. Pressure plates, disguised as natural rock formations, dotted the ground. He navigated them with painstaking caution, recalling years of tracking hostile poachers and military training exercises. The silence here was unnatural, not the vibrant hum of the forest, but a dead, sterile hush, as if the very air had been vacuumed of life. Then, through a break in the dense canopy, he saw it. Not a sprawling complex, but a single, massive, low-profile structure, built directly into the side of a steep hill, perfectly blending with the natural rock face. Its outer shell was a dark, non-reflective material, almost invisible from a distance. There were no visible windows, only heavy, reinforced doors and a series of ventilation shafts that hummed with a low, rhythmic thrum. The perimeter was secured by an invisible energy fence, its faint shimmer occasionally visible under the shifting light, and armed guards, their movements precise, their weapons modern, patrolled the exterior. Elias pressed himself against the cold, damp earth, hidden by a thicket of rhododendrons, his binoculars pressed to his eyes. He scanned the facility, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was far beyond what he'd imagined. This wasn't just a research lab, it was a fortress. Through a small, almost imperceptible opening in the outer shell, perhaps a loading bay or a drone launch point, he caught a glimpse of movement within the facility. Figures in hazmat suits, identical to those who had cleaned up the buck, were wheeling out what appeared to be another animal. But this one was different. It was smaller, its form vaguely canine, but its limbs seemed elongated, its posture stiff, unnatural. The chilling precision of its incision was horrifyingly familiar. And then he saw the faint, iridescent glow emanating from its open chest cavity, a soft, pulsating light that mirrored the eerie sheen of the obsidian shard in his pocket. A wave of nausea washed over him. The buck hadn't been an isolated incident. It was part of a grotesque pattern, a repeated experiment. They were doing this systematically. But what were they doing, and to what end? The unseen threat wasn't just lurking, it was operating deep within the heart of the wilderness, shielded by corporate power and military-grade secrecy. He was in too deep, privy to a horrifying truth that put his life, and potentially the lives of countless others, in unimaginable peril. He had stumbled into a war he never knew existed, and he was gravely outmatched. The scene before Elias was a nightmare made real. The hazmat-suited figures, moving with almost robotic precision, handled the glowing, canine-like creature. Its internal organs pulsed with the same eerie, blue-white luminescence as the shard clutched in his lead-lined container. It was a cold, clinical horror, far removed from the natural cycle of life and death he was accustomed to. They weren't just dissecting, they were harvesting. Or perhaps cultivating. He understood now. This wasn't some random animal mutilation. This was a systematic process, an experiment on a scale he couldn't have conceived. Ethelgard Industries, a global conglomerate, was operating a black site deep within his protected wilderness, using its unsuspecting wildlife for something utterly unprecedented. The glowing material, whatever it was clearly the object of their obsession. Was it energy, a biological agent, a new form of life? He couldn't know for sure, but the implications were staggering and deeply unsettling. As he watched, one of the hazmat figures, seemingly finished with their grim task, paused and lifted a specialized scanner, sweeping it across the tree line. Elias froze, pressing himself further into the damp earth, his breath held captive in his lungs. The scanner's beam, a faint, almost invisible light, passed over his position, then back again. He heard a low, almost imperceptible beep from the device. A chill tighter than any cold he'd ever felt seized him. He had been detected. Suddenly, the air was ripped by the urgent crackle of a radio transmission from the facility, followed by the muffled shouts of guards. Elias didn't wait. He knew these woods, but they knew he was here now. Survival instinct, honed by decades of wilderness living, kicked in. He pulled back, moving silently, swiftly, melting into the dense undergrowth. But the element of surprise was gone. Behind him, heavy footsteps pounded on the metal catwalks of the facility's exterior. Headlights, piercing beams that cut through the dappled forest light, swept across the trees. A guard, rifle raised, emerged from the perimeter, scanning the shadows. Elias could hear their voices now, cold and determined, closing in. Perimeter breach detected. Grid Delta 7, sector sweep in progress. Target identified. He moved like a ghost, dodging branches, scrambling over roots, his rifle clutched tight. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, closer. They had advanced thermal imaging, he knew. His advantage was rapidly diminishing. He needed distance. He needed to disappear. He thought of the cryptic note, "They are always watching." He had walked right into the heart of the unseen enemy's lair, and now he was caught in its snare. The sheer power, the technological superiority of Ethelgard Industries was overwhelming. He was one man against a corporate titan, armed with only a ranger's rifle and a tiny glowing secret. He broke into a desperate sprint, pushing his aging body to its limits, the familiar forest becoming a blur of dark green and shadow. He knew a series of caves, a hidden network he'd discovered years ago. It was his only chance. He didn't know what Ethelgard was doing with the animals, but the sight of that internal glow, the cold clinical dissection, filled him with a renewed grim determination. He wouldn't let them hide this. He couldn't. The forest, his sacred trust, was being desecrated, its creatures becoming raw material for an unknown, sinister purpose. His duty was no longer just to observe and protect. It was to expose. But first he had to survive. The unseen enemy had revealed itself, and it was far more terrifying than any natural predator. The air grew thin, heavy with the scent of damp rock and earth. Elias plunged deeper into the labyrinthine cave system, his flashlight beam dancing wildly ahead. The sounds of his pursuers, though still faint, echoed unnervingly from the cave entrance, a chilling testament to their relentless tracking. He was wounded, a searing pain in his shoulder from a stray bullet, but the burning knowledge of Ethelgard's atrocities fueled his desperate flight. He clutched the lead-lined container, the glowing shard within a silent promise and a terrifying burden. He knew what he held was the key, the irrefutable evidence. But getting it out, getting the truth to the world, seemed an impossible task against a corporate entity with unlimited resources and no apparent moral compass. The ancient rocks around him felt like a tomb, a silent witness to a truth too monstrous to remain hidden, too dangerous to reveal. He was alone, hunted, and exposed, but the fear had crystallized into a cold, unbreakable resolve. He would fight, not just for his life, but for the silent victims of the unseen enemy, for the soul of the wilderness, and for the chance to rip back the curtain on this horrifying conspiracy. Elias, battered and bleeding, pushed deeper into the silent maw of the earth, the small, glowing shard a searing weight in his pocket. He had glimpsed the horrifying truth. Ethelgard Industries was not merely experimenting on animals. They were altering them, imbuing them with something alien, something that pulsed with an unearthly light. His desperate flight through the ancient caves was not just for his own survival, but for the chance to expose this monstrous violation, to bring to light the unseen enemy festering within the very heart of the wilderness. But the corporate shadow was vast, and its reach stretched far beyond the secluded facility. What Elias couldn't yet know was that the effects of Ethelgard's insidious work were already rippling outward, subtly changing the world. The profound, inexplicable intelligence, the heightened awareness, the unprecedented bond that would soon manifest was a direct consequence of the very experiments he risked everything to uncover. Soon the world would witness proof, undeniable and shocking, that the animals held secrets no one could have imagined. And it would begin with a majestic golden-maned lion, freed from its confines, whose reaction upon seeing a 17-year-old girl named Alara Vance would leave everyone speechless, forcing the hidden conspiracy into the stark light of day. The game was escalating, the stakes unimaginable, and the truth, like a caged beast, was about to roar.